When most people picture the heart of the Islamic world, images of the sweeping deserts of Arabia or the ancient minarets of Cairo typically come to mind. But the single most populous Muslim nation on earth is a far cry from the arid Middle East. Instead, it sits thousands of miles east, scattered across a tropical 17,000 island archipelago, where modern mosques stand alongside the colossal stone faces of ancient Hindu and Buddhist temples. Hello, and welcome to Impactful Moments, where we explore some of the most, you guessed it, impactful moments in human history. In this video, we will discuss the spread of Islam to Southeast Asia and how a global faith conquered its largest prize without the sword. The Islamic calendar began with a whisper. In 610 CE, in a cave outside of Mecca, the Prophet Muhammad is said to have received the first revelations of the Quran. By the time of his death in 632, that whisper had unified the fractured tribes of the Arabian Peninsula under his teachings. But while the spark began in Arabia, the resulting firestorm rewrote the known world's geography. In a span of roughly a century, the Rashidun and Umayyad caliphates dismantled the ancient Persian Empire, stripped the Byzantines of their crown jewels in Egypt and the Levant, and pushed their borders from the Atlantic cliffs of Iberia to the doorstep of India. Across these early centuries, the map of Islam was drawn with the tip of a spear, through conquest built on the back of the world's most formidable cavalry. But as the militant Umayyads gave way to the more cosmopolitan Abbasids in 750, the frontier began to change. The Abbasids sidelined the relentless expansion of their predecessors for knowledge and connectivity. They established cordial relations with the likes of Charlemagne in the west and the Tang dynasty in the east. As the caliphs retreated from the battlefield, new forces like the Seljuks, Ayyubids, and Mamluks rose as the protectorates of the faith. Yet, even during the blood-soaked eras such as the Crusades, figures like Saladin proved that the Islamic world was as much a master of diplomacy and chivalry as it was of war. The caliphates had become the world's middle party, sitting at the intersection of every major trade route on earth. But while the great armies of the Middle East were clashing with the Crusaders and the Mongols, the embers of the Abbasids' Islamic Golden Age was leading a quieter expansion that was taking place thousands of miles away. The Islamic Golden Age didn't just produce philosophers, it produced architects of the sea. Armed with the astrolabe and the cartographic precision of the tabula regeriana, Muslim mariners transformed the Indian Ocean from a terrifying void into a sophisticated highway. History has taught us that trade networks are the circulatory system of civilizations, and they carry passengers not accounted for on any ledgers. We've seen the Silk Road act as the artery for Buddhism's journey to East Asia, and we've seen Roman roads facilitate the plagues that ravaged the Byzantine and Persian empires. The sea was no exception to this rule. A merchant in the 13th century needed to choose. While the Silk Road was a proven transcontinental route, the trek from Arabia to China could take well over a year. The sea, while fraught with pirates and often devastating weather, offered the same journey in half the time, funneling much of the world's wealth through a single needle eye, the Strait of Malacca. Separating the island of Sumatra from mainland Asia, this strait was the undisputed choke point of the east-west trek. Because the Nusantara, the proper name of the vast Indonesian archipelago, was fractured into thousands of islands, the Hindu and Buddhist Majapahit Empire, which dominated the area following the attempted Mongol conquest of Java, couldn't rely solely on inland crops. Their civilization was built on the water, where trade was essential for survival. Islam had its first footprint in the area on the coast of Sumatra with outposts dating back to the 9th century. But it wasn't until the 13th century, with the decline of the Hindu kingdoms and the rise of the Delhi Sultanate across India, that the religion truly took regional root. Islam had developed a dominant presence in the Indian Ocean, and for the local rulers across Indonesia, those Islamic outposts were increasingly viewed through an economic lens. Much like the conversions of the kings of Mali or the kingdoms across early medieval Europe, the first true wave of Islam in Southeast Asia was tied to the logic of the market. Conversion meant gaining VIP entry into an international trade network that stretched from the Atlantic to the Pacific. The first evidence of this shift was literally etched in stone. In Aceh in northwest Sumatra, the gravestone of Sultan Malik al-Salih, dated to the late 13th century, bears Arabic inscriptions marking the rise of the Samudra Pasai Sultanate. In the 1290s, when Marco Polo passed through on his return from the court of Kublai Khan, he noted this growing Islamic presence, and when the legendary explorer Ibn Battuta arrived in Aceh half a century later, he noted that a sophisticated, advanced Islamic kingdom had been present for a century. Soon, other Islamic sultanates, like Perlak and Fansur, began to sprout across Sumatra and the Malay Peninsula. While the outer islands were shifting, the great hegemon of the region was beginning to soften. In 1389, the death of Emperor Hayam Wuruk fractured the Majapahit Empire. Across the ensuing decades-long war of succession, the Majapahit grip on the archipelago slipped. By the dawn of the 15th century, this allowed Islam's influence to expand from isolated ports and small polities along Sumatra and the Malay to the political heart of the archipelago, the island of Java. This transition was accelerated by an unlikely catalyst. Zheng He, a Muslim Chinese admiral commanding the Ming dynasty's massive treasure fleets. His 7 naval expeditions through the region established powerful trade nodes, planting high-profile Islamic communities right in the Majapahit Empire's backyard. By the late 1400s, the religious landscape across western Indonesia looked radically different from how it had 2 centuries earlier. The Shafi'i school of Sunni Islam dominated Sumatra, and traditional accounts note that in 1481, Raden Patah founded the Sultanate of Demak on Java's coast. By breaking away from the Majapahit, he created a sovereign Muslim power on Indonesia's most populous island. With Islam in control of Sumatra, the Malay Peninsula, and now the vital ports of Java, the collapse of the fractured Majapahit Empire was simply a matter of time. Yet this rapid shift didn't mirror the state-driven conquests seen in Europe, North Africa, or the Middle East. While the final political blow in 1527 was a definitive military campaign, the broader religious transition of the populace was almost exclusively bloodless. The hearts of the people were won by the expression of Islam that carried it: Sufism. For a millennium, the archipelago had practiced deeply mystical forms of Hinduism and Buddhism. A rigid, strictly legal presentation of a new faith likely could have triggered a harsh cultural rejection. Instead, Sufi mystics and a legendary group of revered Islamic saints, known as the Wali Songo, preached an inward-looking, personalized faith that felt instantly familiar. They adapted to the local culture rather than erasing it, allowing existing traditions and local rituals to persist under an Islamic umbrella. For example, ancient Hindu shadow puppet plays, common in the area, weren't banned. They were subtly rewritten by these saints to carry Islamic parables, turning a beloved local art form into a vehicle for the new faith. When the Majapahit elite finally fled the island of Java, seeking refuge on the nearby island of Bali, they didn't leave behind a conquered, occupied people. They left behind a population of millions that had already integrated Islam into their daily lives. Enjoying so far? Give us a like and subscribe. It helps more than you know and keeps this kind of content coming. With the collapse of the Majapahit, the next century saw the archipelago fracture into a dynamic patchwork of states. While the Majapahit elite fled to Bali, maintaining their Hindu-Buddhist traditions, the vacuum across the other islands was filled by dozens of rival Islamic sultanates stretching across thousands of miles. On Java, the pioneering Sultanate of Demak, whose leaders actually descended from the Majapahit royal line, keeping many of their court traditions alive, would eventually fracture into competing factions, but all would remain Muslim. And this religious transformation wasn't nearly confined to Java, or even Sumatra. It reshaped the entire geography of the region. On the Malay Peninsula, the Sultanate of Malacca rose to become one of the world's premier maritime emporiums, commanding global trade via its control of the Malacca Strait. Further northeast, on the massive island of Borneo, this era birthed deep-rooted political institutions, like the Sultanate of Brunei, which has continuously existed to this day. Across these disparate islands, adopting Islam meant adopting a sophisticated, universal framework for law, diplomacy, and international credit. While the region may have been politically fragmented, it was profoundly unified by a shared Islamic faith and model of statehood. Shortly after Islam rooted itself across the archipelago, the entire world was flipped on its side. As the 15th century drew to a close, the age of exploration sparked an era of unprecedented global upheaval, driven by a voracious European appetite with carving up the globe. These Indonesian spice islands became a geopolitical magnet, driving the likes of Ferdinand Magellan to set out on his fateful voyage around the Earth, attempting to carve out a new route. Ultimately, Indonesia fell into Dutch hands. For nearly 2 centuries, the region was regulated not by a government, but by a mega corporation, the Dutch East India Company, or the VOC. When the company collapsed, the territory formalized as the Dutch East Indies, remaining a colonial possession until after World War II, when it finally emerged as the independent nation of Indonesia, which literally translates from Greek as Indian Islands. Remarkably, centuries of rule under European Christian power did very little to alter the cultural fabric of the populace. The population remained steadfastly Muslim, with the lone exception of Bali, which retained its ancient Majapahit Hindu-Buddhist traditions. Today, we routinely associate the heart of Islam with the Middle Eastern deserts, forgetting that its most vibrant, densely populated center sits alongside the ancient temples of Borobudur and Prambanan. Out of Indonesia's current population of nearly 290 million people, an astounding 240 to 250 million identify as Muslim. The islands that quietly absorbed Islam along the 13th century trade routes didn't simply outlast colonialism. It built the most populous Muslim nation on Earth. I hope you enjoyed this video and found this period in history both informative and enlightening. Please feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below, and I hope you can join us for another video. Thanks for watching.